Chapter 6 is about the skeletal system. The skeletal system is this system of bones and joints and ligaments that help support and protect your body. Some of the main functions of the skeletal system is support. So if you think about your upper leg bone or your upper arm bone, those are supporting structures for all the other soft tissues like the muscle that attaches to it. If those muscles are contracting, they're going to contract across joints, and that will assist movement. Bones also store minerals like calcium and phosphorus, and bones make red blood cells like erythrocytes. That's the red bone marrow. Now, bone is this interesting combination between minerals that makes the bone very brittle and rigid, and proteins like collagen that make the bone flexible. So pound for pound, bone has a stronger tensile strength than steel. There's a variety of different types of bones. Each have their own particular function. Like long bones act really well as levers, whereas flat bones tend to be more for protection. Short bones are better for stability, whereas irregular bones are better for things like support and protection, especially in your vertebral column where your spinal cord is running through there. If we take a look at a long bone, we can see some of the basic bone structure. The epiphysis is the ends of the bone. The diaphysis is the shaft of the bone. And in between the diaphysis, the shaft, and the epiphysis, the end, is the metaphysis, this little section where the growth plates would be. Bone has other features to it, especially if you look internally. There's articular cartilage at the end, which helps it articulate or move. There's spongy bone, which keeps the bone kind of lightweight but strong. There's an epiphyseal line or epiphyseal plate. That's what we refer to as the growth plate. So bone kind of grows from that area out. And then there's red bone marrow, which is what's in charge of making red blood cells. There's also a layer of compact bone. Compact bone is more associated with the diaphysis, the shaft. Inside the compact bone is a medullary cavity. That's where you're going to have yellow bone marrow. That stores mostly fat. You're also going to have nerve endings and blood vessels sometimes associated with that. But a lot of nerve endings and blood vessels are associated with the periosteum, this outer layer that wraps around bone. And then embedded in that are blood vessels. There are a variety of bone cells. Osteocytes are the mature bone cells. Osteogenic cells, so genesis means beginning. So these are the cells that are dividing and growing. Osteoblasts are bone building cells. So those are cells that are going to be in charge of replacing some of that matrix of the bone. Osteocytes are the mature bone cells. Osteoclasts develop from white blood cells. But the job of an osteoclast, think of it like a chomper. Osteoclasts chomp or dissolve bone, whereas osteoblasts will build new bone. So how do you get the minerals released out of the bone that you have? Well, osteoclasts are chomping the bone, releasing minerals like calcium and phosphorus. So here again, you can see osteocytes maintain blood tissue. That's the mature bone cell. Osteoblasts are the builders. They're forming the bone matrix. Osteogenic cells are dividing and helping that bone grow. Osteoclasts are what dissolve bone and release those minerals. So you have a layer of bone that we call spongy. You have a layer of bone that we call compact. Compact because it's much more dense. Spongy bone is going to have the marrow in it, red and yellow marrow. Spongy bone is going to be more central, whereas compact bone is going to be more lateral to the bone. So let's take a look at some of the similarities and differences here. But spongy bone is more lattice-like. We find it in the epiphysis, the ends of the bone. It's going to be associated with bone marrow. Compact bone has this really thick matrix. It's going to be more in the shaft diaphysis, and it's associated with that periosteum, that layer that surrounds the bone. Here's a picture of an osteon. The osteon consists of several major parts. So this is a microscope slide of dense, compact bones. You might remember back to bone tissue that you see something similar to this. It looks like a tree that's been cut in half. So that round circle, it looks like a target or the tree trunk, that's the osteon. The lacuna, that's going to be the space where the mature bone cell is staying. So that the dark dots in here are the mature bone cells in their space, lacuna. The central canal is in the center. Sometimes you might hear it referred to as Haverson Canal. That's where the blood vessels and the nerves are. So like there's blood vessels and nerves in that central canal. And then the bands that make the rings of the tree or the rings of the target, that's laminella. So here's a diagram of an osteon. So you can see the osteocyte, mature blood cell, embedded in the lacuna. You can see the nerves and lymphatic vessels and arteries in the central canal. You can see the rings, that's the lamella. You can see the osteoclast, the chomping cell, the blast, the building cell. Well, speaking of building, how do bones grow? So here's a picture of a bone from a baby. You'll notice that it starts off entirely cartilage. But gradually, it's going to get these layers on the outside, and then the medullary cavity is going to form. That's going to form because of osteoclast chomping away in there. That bone will ossify. It'll transform from cartilage by calcium and mineral deposits into harder, dense bone that's going to make up the diaphysis, the shaft. The ends of the bone are still going to be mostly cartilage until you get to be a little bit older, where that cartilage plate or growth plate forms right at the metaphysis. And then once you become an adult, most of your cartilage has disappeared except for on the very ends, the articular cartilage. So how do you know how to age a skeleton? Well, one of the best, easiest things to do is look at like how much cartilage is in the skeleton. More cartilage, younger person. Less cartilage, more brittle bones, much, much older person. This is showing how bones grow from that growth plate or epiphyseal plate, where layer A is calcified, it's ossified, it's completely bone. All right, so those cells have absorbed calcium, they're not living now. That's just matrix. Then we have the next layer up, the hypertrophic cartilage. So that's mature cartilage cells. The next layer is the proliferating cartilage, where that's going to divide and form new matrix, pushing that bone out, elongating that bone. And then D is the resting cartilage. It's anchoring to the end of the bone, the epiphysis. So take a look at this diagram. Like, this is my little diagram of bone. You can see this one layer now of cartilage. Like, it's going to divide and push that layer up. And while it does, it makes the bone get longer. So that proliferating layer continues to move up as it's adding new bone cells and increasing the length of the bone. Similarly, when bones grow in diameter, the ratio of dense, compact bone to the medullary cavity has to stay the same. So osteoclasts are increasing the medullary cavity. Meanwhile, osteoblasts are building that outer ring so that the bone grows like in proportion. So as the outside of the bone is growing, the cavity is also growing. That way, there's not too much dense, compact bone. Otherwise, your bones would be too heavy. If they were all dense, compact bone, it would be way too heavy. But because they're spongy bone, it keeps them strong but light. There are some factors that can influence bone growth. Hormones do, so growth hormone affects all cells, causing the body to grow. But sex steroids like estrogen and testosterone can help. When women hit menopause, their body stops producing estrogen, which it causes a problem for their bones. The problem is that estrogen stimulates the osteoblast to build new bone. But as estrogen levels drop, the osteoblast, the builders, slow down, and the osteoclasts maintain their same speed. So you're losing a lot of bone, but you're not building it as much. Genetics can also affect bone growth, as well as dwarfism or exercise stress. The more you have weight-bearing exercise, the thicker, stronger your bones can become. Bone remodeling means that your body's replacing bone on a regular basis. And the way that it does that is osteoclasts are breaking it down, releasing the calcium and minerals into your blood. Osteoblasts are rebuilding that bone. So gradually your skeleton gets replaced over time. But in the case of osteoporosis, the osteoclasts are chomping way faster than the osteoblasts can be building. Let's say you break a bone. It's a great example of seeing how your bones can heal. The first thing that's going to happen is a hematoma. That means a blood clot. So the first thing that happens if you break a bone, the blood starts to clot. Then this external callus starts to form. So that callus is going to hold the bone kind of in shape. It's going to be semi-solid. But gradually that callus is going to be replaced with bone. So that's the job of the osteoblast, the bone building cells. They replace all that messed up bone. Well, how do you get rid of the fragments? Well, that's the job of osteoclasts. Osteoclasts are breaking those bone fragments down. You'll notice then in the heel bone that you can still see that bulge and evidence of the break. So broken bones still leave evidence behind even after they're healed. There are some nutrients that are important to bone health and homeostasis. So calcium is important because bones store calcium in order to maintain their structural integrity. But vitamin D is also necessary. Vitamin D is necessary for the reabsorption of calcium. Without vitamin D, your body can't absorb that calcium. Vitamin K is helpful for bone mineralization, that is adding the calcium and phosphorus to bone, whereas magnesium is useful in bone structure. Omega-3s are a fatty acid, they're lipids, and they help reduce bone inflammation even. Here are some of the hormones that are important to maintain bone. Human growth hormone increases the size of bone. Testosterone, estrogen, those are the sex hormones. But thyroxine is a hormone that helps to stimulate bone growth. So human growth hormone works together with thyroxine so that together they help stimulate bone growth best. PTH, or parathyroid hormone, helps stimulate the osteoclast to release calcium into the blood, whereas calcitonin helps stimulate osteoblasts to collect that calcium from the blood and deposit it into the new bone. Here are some bone disorders, problems with bones. Fractures is just a scientific name or medical name for a break. So if your bone is broken, whether it's cracked or broken all the way through, it's a fracture. Osteoporosis is typically a problem as women get older. Lack of exercise, obesity, age, and being female are all contributing factors to osteoporosis, which just means your bones become more porous or full of holes. And that's because the osteoclasts are outpacing your bone builders, your osteoblasts. Osteogenesis imperfecta is brittle bone disease. Your bones have way too much calcium, not nearly enough collagen. So they don't have the flexibility. They're like chalk. They're easy to break, very brittle. This is a genetic disorder. And then Paget's disease, that's a disease, again, where you have overactive osteoclasts, which results in kind of weaker bone. Let's take a look at what osteoporosis looks like if we were to look at the bone itself. You can see this bone here is healthy, spongy bone, but this bone here, you can see there's a lot of pores starting to form. That happens with age. So that wraps up our chapter on bones